Blood, Honor, Intergalactic Conquest.
What is it?
It's a video about confrontations between the Klingons and the Federation. Since there's a lot to talk about here, and I'm going to jump around quite a bit in the video, I want to nail down 3 things that we're going to firmly go over. 1, why the Klingons seemingly have done so well against the Federation historically on the battlefield. 2, why the Klingons themselves seem to be one of the galaxy's most formidable fighting forces, in spite of the ridiculous on-screen incompetence we see. And 3, all things told at the end of the day, who would really come off better in a rumble between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. So with those as our touchstones, let's hop around here and see what we can riddle out. The Klingons themselves are an ancient race of warriors that, in spite of modern technological development, seemingly haven't been able to extricate themselves from feudalism. Their society seems to embody some aspects of a caste system, their politics seem locked in the hands of large houses, and we get the impression that the Klingons prize physical combat prowess over, say, big nerdy brain smarts. The Klingons are definitely not someone you should stop kicking when they're on the ground. They have a ridiculous history of getting back up after crazy losses. As a matter of fact, when we journey through the Deep Space Nine series, we find out the Klingon homeworld was actually sacked by a race of crazy aliens who were a majorly technological superior faction in the Gamma Quadrant. Think about that for a minute. Imagine you're like doing the Crusades and XCOM suddenly kicks in the door to show you what aliens do to that ass. Also, they had Kales's interesting-looking sword thing stolen from them. Klingons themselves are built like tanks that came with twice the necessary amount of parts in the boxes. Though they look like they could have been assembled by 7-year-olds, they seemingly have an unending supply of backup organs. Doctors note that Klingons are seemingly more complicated than they need to be, but also can basically survive any level of ass-whooping that would kill a lot of other species. Klingon forces and ships that we see in the shows are seemingly very powerful, stacking up to or even outmatching several of the other armed forces of the major powers in the quadrant. The Klingons also have a great history of sticking to what works. They had an effective fleet of medium cruisers that they've upgraded to be able to hang in modern combat. They've developed what appears to be a rather slick and simplistic major battle cruiser that can back up their smaller fleets with heavy firepower, and they've held out on the Bird of Prey for years, upgrading it and modifying it to meet the current combat standards. This limited number of ships allows the Klingons to field an easy-to-supply, easy-to-repair army that doesn't require a vast amount of different training to shuffle crews about. Chances are you've served on one of the 4 basic types of Klingon ship. And those ships, while they may have subclasses, probably aren't that terribly different than each other. Different kinds of birds of prey aren't exactly going to throw an experienced Klingon helmsman for a loop. The Federation, on the other hand, seems as though they can't keep track of all the ship designs they have. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry can bring whatever they want to the table, and they'll slap a nacelle on it. The Federation also seems to have a ridiculous habit of abandoning all their high-tech military projects and shelving them, until they desperately need them to cloak Captain Sisko in an even heavier layer of plot armor. Or, to have a completely nonsensical episode in Star Trek Voyager. While diversity in the shipyard may harm the Federation on the warfront, diversity is their greatest asset as an intergalactic state. The Federation is an amalgam of minds and technology itself, which really is the key to their success, and the reason why the Federation is dominant within the Alpha and Beta quadrants as a major power. Now, when I say dominant, I don't mean dominant militarily, I mean dominant in terms of influence and expansion. Clearly, the Federation is able to maintain and proliferate in a way that other empires are not able to match. Since the Federation is so vast, it would be impossible to truly go over all the aspects of the Federation's consolidation and founding. However, the story starts with humanity's launch into space and the tutelage of the Vulcans. The Federation have proven themselves dogged and adaptable, facing not only the Borg threat, but playing a major role in defeating the Dominion. The Federation also arguably has the most powerful intelligence organization in the Alpha Quadrant, as well as having a masterful diplomatic corps at their disposal. Nor is the Federation weak. They field an impressive fleet and have managed to hang in conflicts against most of the major powers in the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Though Starfleet is described as primarily a scientific organization dedicated to exploration, they are more than capable of defending themselves and even engaging in offensive war. So now that we have a brief overview of the major powers we're looking at here, let's again ask that first question. Why do the Klingons tend to defeat the Federation in battle? We might think of the Klingons as having an initial edge, but we also note the Federation is powerful. So why does the Federation seem to get their nose bloodied in the majority of conflicts against the Klingons when they can, say, handle the Cardassians like it ain't no thing? While I think that there are many layers of answers here, I'd like to put forth that I think the number one answer lies within the Bird of Prey.
I'll admit that the strength of birds of prey is kind of hard to nail down. We see them exploding constantly for what seems like no reason. However, we also see them surviving an enormous amount of Dominion fire.
Shields are down to 85%.
We route emergency power to secondary shield emitters.
Setting aside this difficult to figure out strength meter, we do know two things about the bird of prey. It's comprised of far less material than the larger starship counterparts that most of the other Alpha and Beta Quadrant powers use, and it's powerful enough to take down even the capital ships of the other major powers. The fact that a ship the size of the bird of prey can hang 10 with major battleships and even defeat them is very, very important when it comes to intergalactic warfare. You may recall that the strength of the Defiant lies in its small size and large firepower. It's an easy-to-produce ship, and though rather cramped and harsh to live on, the ratio of investment to damage output is quite drastic. And the bird of prey falls right into this class. We can also talk about Dominion fighters sometime, however for the sake of this video, the bird of prey really is the ship in the Alpha and Beta Quadrants that is filling this role in combat. I'm gonna say it. The bird of prey is OP, it's a powerhouse, and it basically makes all other ships obsolete and stupid. The cost to build, equip, arm, and crew a bird of prey would be so drastically less than the cost to arm, equip, and crew any of the other capital ships used by the Federation. And since we see such ships oftentimes have a hard time tangling with two or more birds of prey, we know that the ratio here is just really terrible for the Federation and really great in favor of the Klingons. Now, if the Federation was rocking a fleet of, say, fucking 200 Defiants, then the scales would definitely be tipped. However, the Klingons do seem to operate hundreds of birds of prey. We're talking wings upon wings of overwhelming force and firepower. We see the Federation and some of the other empires using fighters in close combat when it comes to major battles. I'd like to point out that while these ships are pretty cool and can come close to the roles of the bird of prey, they aren't able to operate independently in deep space. The bird of prey can reach warp, it can cloak, it can travel through deep space over great periods of time. The bird of prey also has a large enough crew complement that it can replace officers and crew members when they're fallen, keeping the ship operating even when casualties are sustained. Basically, anytime the Federation enters a war with the Klingon Empire, they're batting against the economics and logistics. The bird of prey also fills more combat roles and is even capable of atmospheric strikes, something that many of the large Federation ships, or even many of the smaller Federation ships like the Defiant, aren't really shown to do. And if I were to hazard a guess as to why the Klingon Empire was able to engage in an offensive war against Cardassia, and then turn around and fight a prolonged conflict with the Dominion, in which part of the time they were the only faction facing off against a far superior Dominion force, I would have to say that the bird of prey is probably the reason why this was possible. While we're talking about the Dominion, we should talk about the Dominion tactic of kamikaze killing Federation capital ships. We see them do it to several different kinds of ships, but the point is that the loss of one of these Dominion fighters is not going to impact the Dominion considerably, whereas the loss of a Galaxy-class starship is going to wreck up Starfleet's day quite a bit. Poor Starfleet, we watched them lose so many Galaxy-class ships over the course of TNG and DS9. The point being, the bird of prey gives the Klingon Empire a definitive edge in space combat against any other empire. When we look at empires built around capital ships like the Cardassian Empire and the Romulan Empire, we see this fatal flaw come to full fruition. The amount of resources to create even one Cardassian battleship will be matched with probably 20 or 30 birds of prey. The ratios are just so staunchly in favor of the Klingons that it's practically unreasonable to think that a war would ever be possible with them. Let's also really quickly address the elephant in the room here, cloaking technology.
Captain, another ship is decloaking, bearing 215 Mark 310. It's the Enterprise.
It would seem as though across most universes the Federation is pretty hesitant to use cloaking technology. I'm guessing this is because they don't enjoy violating treaties, and even in a war against the Klingons, for example, if they violated the cloaking treaty, the Romulans might become aggressive. So there's lots of factors for them to juggle when it comes to cloaking devices, and sufficing to say, they seem to often turn against them, which gives the Klingons a very large advantage. I will say the Federation often seems to overcome this imbalance, which once again is why I think so much rests on the Bird of Prey itself. Even if we're talking about uncloaked combat, the Bird of Prey still retains all of its significant advantages. This leads pretty well into fleet organization, because when we talk about Klingon fleets, we're talking about wings of ships that are comprised of relatively similar craft that are designed for a specific purpose, whereas when we talk about Federation fleet composition, we're talking about a scattering of different ships that are often hastily cobbled together into makeshift fleets that do not have any sort of predefined way of operating together. The Federation is restricted to a lot of ad hoc fleet composition and maneuvering because they do not have a fleet designed to execute a series of preconceived strategies. Having a simplistic, easily refurbishable, easily replaceable, reliable professional army is going to make a large difference against a fleet of ships that are not necessarily all designed for combat or even designed for the same purpose, let alone designed to function together. When we're discussing general ship design itself, the Federation is oftentimes having to balance and compromise between scientific capabilities and military combat capabilities, whereas the Klingon fleet is making no such compromises, committing the majority of their fleet to well-defined warships. And because the Federation is yet to fully pursue a major military path when it comes to construction of starships and fleets, the Federation is oftentimes hindered by their own experimental stages. It is noted, for example, the Defiant is underpowered for the amount of guns it carries. The ship can essentially tear itself apart with its own engines or exhaust itself rapidly with its own firepower. Not a problem Birds of Prey seem to have. The Federation's lack of experience designing combat ships also tends to lead their experimentation off the rails. I'd like to briefly turn back to the Prometheus for a second, because I thought this ship was just absolutely ridiculous. Like, what if the docking clamps are damaged? What if one portion of the reattachment section is damaged? Any number of things could go wrong. What if one of the portions is destroyed? Is this ship just going to hang out there in space and do nothing? I'm sure the idea of a modular multi-combat ship sounds appealing. However, for the cost of one of these ships, you could probably field 20 Birds of Prey, many of which could engage in the same triple-on-one tactics. Stepping back from the Bird of Prey for a minute, let's jump onto that second question, as in it ties in very well with the first one. After all, the Klingon Empire faces off successfully against many different powers, several of which use different strategies. The Cardassians use a relatively consistent fleet of high-powered ships, backed up with a small contingency of fighters. And the Dominion, as previously stated, operates very similarly to the Klingons, fielding large wings of fighters supported by heavy cruisers and heavy battleships. So how do the Klingons hold their own against this vast variety of foes? Well, I think the answer comes twofold. One being their warrior culture, which gives them several advantages that help them stand up against even implacable foes like the Dominion. Second, strategic and tactical diversity. We often see the Klingons practice an array of tactics and strategies that layer and fold together in ways that the Federation, Romulans, and Cardassians, and even Dominion don't seem to do. It's no wonder the Klingons are known for often winning devastating and legendary upsets.
Fighting the Battle of Klak-Dak-Brak or some such thing over and over.
The Battle of Klak-de-Kel-Bracht is a legendary Klingon victory over the Romulans almost a century ago.
You dare interrupt the Battle of Klak-de-Kel-Bracht?
While the Klingons are by no means undefeatable, it can easily be surmised that the average Klingon is a far superior warrior to the average citizen of the Federation. Diversity in strategy and tactics. So, you may remember General Martok's cavalry raid, as it were. I actually showed some clips here when we discussed the Bird of Prey earlier. Captain Sisko knows what this is through a historical reference. However, it seems to be a tactic that is totally lost on Starfleet as well as the Dominion. The Klingons also engage in multi-angular attacks by decloaking their Birds of Prey, or by striking first in one group and then hiding, only to have a second group strike again. These tactics, again, are not, at least on screen, replicated by the Federation or the Cardassians or the Romulans. The Klingons appear to be the only ones using these types of strategies and tactics efficiently. The way their ships are organized, they're in a much better position to implement these kinds of tactics. Strategically speaking, the Klingons seem to be very proficient. They are able to functionally wipe out the majority of the Cardassian fleet and strike deep into the Empire. Klingon strategies also are able to hold back the Dominion, while the Federation and Romulan fleets are unable to enter combat due to the Breen weapons. Though much of the strategy must be surmised based on things that are off-screen, we do know that Klingons are capable of doing things that other empires are simply not able to match. I should also note here that during the brief time that the Klingons and the Federation were engaged in border hostilities and minor conflicts, the Klingons seemed to be getting the better hand of the Federation right away. After all, our friends on Deep Space Nine were mourning the loss of many of their friends and the destruction of many Federation ships, whereas the Klingons were giving out the Order of the Batleth like it was candy. Alright, so the last question here. You probably already know which direction I'm swinging based on all the things I've said about the Klingon Empire and how much I've talked them up. But I'll be the first to admit that there probably are some timelines in which the Federation is going to be challenging or even coming out on top of the Klingons in a conflict. We do, after all, see Captain Riker in a badass version of the Enterprise, which has a cloaking device and some sort of super mega giga phaser that blows through Klingon ships like they're butter. However, in many another universe, and in the main timeline universe, the Klingons seem to be far dominant compared to the Federation. The Federation seems as though it can and does put up a gallant fight. However, at the end of the day, the Klingons seem to be inevitably coming out on top. The individual soldier superiority, the far more efficient fleets that are easier to repair, refit, and shuffle crews through, and the wider variety of often superior tactics and strategies puts the Klingons ahead of the Federation in any major conflict, in my opinion. In the future, I'm going to do a video about the way warfare is conducted in the Star Trek universe, like on the strategic and tactical level, and I'll break down some of the reasons again why the Klingons are much more efficient and show some of their tactics and strategies and exactly how they would work against the Federation. But sufficing to say, the Klingons are the safe, consistent bet. The Klingons are far more likely to succeed in a major war and defeat the Federation, leaving an Imperial overseer to watch over Earth. Well, I hope you liked this video. It was kind of a random and weird topic, and maybe everybody already knew the answer I was going to put forth, but I hope it was enjoyable anyhow. Next up, I'm probably going to do some more readings, but I am eventually working towards a Dune thing, so look out for that Dune thing in the, semi-distant future. And there'll probably be another Star Trek thing mixed in there. So until next time, I will see you later.